Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, week 2 of spoiler season has already started off with a bang, but if you missed one of my episodes from last week on Tovolar Dire Overlord, make sure you check that episode out. Because we finally have a werewolf commander that isn't completely embarrassing, and actually this one is really good. And we also have this new card, which is not at all about werewolves, but it is 100% amazing. So yeah, if you haven't seen my most recent episode on Croaking Counterpart, make sure you check that one out. Also, from very early this morning, yeah, I probably need another cup of coffee here in a bit, I did an episode on Augur of Autumn, and this has got to be a brand new Commander staple. And just as that is an incredibly powerful card in mono green, so is this one, because if you've been playing Magic for just a year or two, even you know that green always gets all the good stuff. Now you might have already seen this spoiler because actually this spoiler came out over the weekend, but I wasn't working this weekend because, you know, even I need a few days off, okay? But I'm back at it now, so let's get talking about Unnatural Growth. Unnatural Growth is an enchantment that costs, get ready for it, 1 green, so 5 mana in total. And it says, at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. Oh my goodness, is that a good effect. Basically, hey, is it combat? Okay, then you know what? Your creatures are twice as large. Oh, and of course, this is on your opponent's turns as well. Oh, and of course, there's plenty of ways to use and abuse this, and we'll get to that here in a bit. But even without doing things that make this absolutely absurd, it's still just pretty absurd on its own. I mean, this card would be good as a one-off effect at sorcery speed. I mean, obviously, the mana cost of it would have to be different, but still, this is an enchantment, which is probably the hardest permanent type to deal with in Commander, and yeah, it's gonna stick around and continue to make your army massive. I mean, even to say that maybe you've got a landfall deck and you've got Rampaging Balefs in play and you've been making a bunch of 4/4s by getting lands into play, all of a sudden those 4/4s, which are, you know, decent sized creatures in a game of Commander, become massive 8/8s, which are just, yeah, massive in a game of Commander. You double up the strength of your army on every single combat, again, including on your opponent's turn, so your blocks are even better. For a 5 mana enchantment, this does an absurd amount of work, especially when paired with certain other cards, and again, we'll get to those here in just a bit, I promise. But first, thank you, Eddie, for the wonderful discussion around this card. And one thing that Eddie pointed out, and I completely agreed with, and we've talked about on a few episodes before, well, thank goodness they are starting to pay attention to how a card's converted mana cost can affect its amount of play. Sorry, I just misspoke right there. Instead of converted mana cost, I just meant mana cost. Again, this is 1 green. So it is not easy at all to cast unless you've got a deck that's either green or maybe has one other color. If you're running a 3, 4, or 5 color deck, good luck trying to cast this. For incredibly powerful cards like this, I really think they should have restrictive casting costs, or else just every deck's gonna run them. I mean, okay, just think about it. If this card was 4 generic mana and a green, how many other decks could just justify throwing this in even if they don't have a lot of green in their deck? Doubling up the size of all of your creatures can be essentially really useful and very powerful in pretty much any deck that's running creatures. Now, does that mean that green should keep getting all the good things like this? No. I would like to see very powerful cards in other colors as well, you know, with very restrictive casting costs so that those colors get those specifically too. And I have brought this up before in the example of the card that I am most upset that they did not do this with is Smothering Tithe. Just a heads up, for the next minute, I'm probably going to be on a soapbox about this card, so if you want to skip ahead, go ahead, okay? There are plenty of defendants of Smothering Tithe out there, and that is fine. But to say that this card was made to help white decks ramp is 100% false. This card does not have a restrictive casting cost at all. It costs 3 and a white, so basically any deck that has white can easily cast it. It doesn't matter if white is your least used color in the deck, as long as you've got it, you can use it. Because of that, this overpowered card sees an absurd amount of play when it could have been easily fixed. If Smothering Tithe had a restrictive casting cost like, oh, I don't know, white, 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 still the exact same converted mana cost, but incredibly restrictive, that wouldn't be the case. And then that would solve the issue of, mono white players out there saying, we need ramp cards. Cool, here you go. Here's a ramp card that's just for you because no one else can cast it. So again, I am happy to see a very restrictive casting cost on a very powerful card like Unnatural Growth. Because you actually have to think, can I cast this card in my deck? Not just, oh, this card's powerful, therefore it's in my deck. Okay, soapbox over about restrictive casting costs and Smothering Tithe. Let's talk about how we can absolutely break Unnatural Growth. And that would be ways to get additional combat. So, Gruul decks out there, rejoice. A card like Relentless Assault is going to untap all creatures that attack this turn, and after this main phase, you get an extra combat phase, then an extra main phase. Again, the way that Unnatural Growth is worded, it says at the beginning of each combat, double the power of toughness of each creature you control till end of turn. So it happens at the beginning of each of your combats, and if you've got more than one, well, this gets even better, exponentially better. Again, let's just say that you've got those 4/4s like I talked about earlier. You go to combat, now they're 8/8s, which again are massive, and you swing. Then you cast your Relentless Assault, and you get to untap all them, and now guess what? You go to your extra combat, and all of a sudden, all of them double from being 8/8s into 16/16s. So you just started off with, 4/4s in play, and you quadrupled their power by just getting one extra combat with a card like Relentless Assault. Obviously, if you can keep getting more and more extra combats, this gets even more ridiculous. So maybe you've got something like Hellkite Charger, which is a 5/5 with flying and haste, and whenever it attacks you can pay 5 red, and if you do, untap all attacking creatures, and after this phase, there's an extra combat phase. Again, even just doing this once, that 5/5 Hellkite Charger, by the time it attacks the last time, is going to be a 20/20 with flying. And again, since you're in green and you've got ways to massively ramp, you could probably get up to that 14 mana to get this twice. And actually, that being said, there are ways to generate mana in combat as well. We'll actually talk about one of those here in a bit, but I'm not going to spoil it yet. Regardless, Morog, Fury of Akoum, if he is in one of your decks, again, not a deck built around him because, again, you don't have access to green, but if he's in one of your decks and you've got landfall synergies and extra combat synergies with that, have fun with this new card. It has landfall whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. If it's your main phase, the additional combat phase after this main phase, at the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. So, yeah, you can get extra combats with this card just by getting lands into play. And obviously, since you're in green, you've got ways to get more than one land into play, so have fun doubling, then doubling again, then doubling again, and your opponents are going to be very, very dead. Oh, yeah, and I probably should have mentioned this before, but Morog, Fury of Akoum also says, each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it attacked this turn. So your creatures keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger thanks to this, and they're doubling as well. Yeah, that gets absurd. Of course, you can also take advantage of all this damage that you're going to be dishing out with something like Berserker's Onslaught to just double up that damage too by giving your attacking creatures double strike. And of course, your little goat friend Pathbreaker Ibex can help you out as well because whenever it attacks, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn. X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So you pump your creatures even further based on your biggest creature whose power was already doubled, and now they're all getting trample too. Now, unfortunately, I should mention that this little goat is $21. So yeah, not so little when it comes to price tag, so reprint it please. Regardless, a much more budget-friendly card that is still very impactful with this new card is Return of the Wildspeaker. It says choose one. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So if you want to pump your non-human creatures by +3/+3, again, that's going to get doubled essentially, again with that trigger, so it's basically a +6/+6. Or, you can also just draw an absurd amount of cards because you're doubling up your creature's power until the end of the turn, and now your biggest creature is drawing you a ton of cards. Yeah, there's a lot of powerful things that can be done with Unnatural Growth. But now that we've talked about some cards and some strategies that work really well with this, let's talk about some commanders that can utilize this card. A mono green commander that would very much appreciate this card has got to be God Eternal Ronus. It's a 5/5 zombie god, and when it enters the battlefield, you double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. So Ronus already doubles your creature's power on ETB, and now you get to basically do that again, and double the toughness too. So this can turn your already giant turn where you swing out and finish off all your opponents into something even bigger. Next up, how about Prime Speaker Zagana? She enters the battlefield with X++1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And when she enters the battlefield, you draw cards equal to her power. So basically, with a decent-sized creature in play, you go to combat, maybe don't swing at that creature because you want it to survive, go to your second main phase, then cast your commander. So essentially, you're doubling up the amount of cards that you would have drawn. And also, she's going to be pretty massive when she goes to combat next turn as well. And speaking of massive, let's talk about Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. Selvala has pay a green, tap, add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Now again, if you activate this during or after combat, that's twice as big. So have fun with all that mana. And speaking of all that mana, even Marwyn the Nurturer could utilize this card too. She can tap to add an amount of green equal to her power, so again, doubling up her power is obviously a great thing. But the most absurd amount of mana that you might be able to get thanks to this card has got to be with Klauth, Unrivaled Ancient. It's a 4/4 dragon with flying and haste, and when it attacks you at X mana in any combination of colors where X is the total power of attacking creatures. Spend this mana only to cast spells. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So you double up how threatening your army is, and you double up the amount of mana that they're generating you too. And again, even with just Klauth, you are generating 8 mana, which more than even just pays for the commander itself. But now that we're talking about dragons, there's another dragon that is definitely going to want this card with Atarka World Render. Atarka is a 6/4 dragon with flying and trample, and whenever a dragon you control attacks, it gains double strike until end of turn, which obviously includes this dragon as well. So when we go to combat and double this to a 12/8 and we swing, again, if this is unblocked, that's going to be 24 commander damage thanks to that double strike. And even if it is blocked, chances are a lot of damage is going through anyways because of that trample. And speaking of one-shotting your opponents with your commander, let's talk about Ghalta Primal Hunger. Ghalta is going to cost X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control, and it's got trample, and of course it's a 12/12. So doubling up your other creature's power until the end of the turn can make it a lot easier to cast Ghalta. In fact, with that in play and just a creature or two in play, Ghalta is probably going to cost next to nothing, again just costing 2 mana to get out. And of course, when you actually go to combat with Ghalta, now it's a 24/24, so good luck to your opponents. And finally, for all you Grunn fans out there, yes, this can also work really well with Grunn. If you kick Grunn, he enters the battlefield with 5 counters on him, and so basically then he's a 10/10, and when he attacks alone, you double his power and toughness until end of turn, making him a 20/20, and again with Unnatural Growth, he's going to be a 40/40. Just make sure you give it trample so you're not getting chump blocked by a small 1/1. Regardless, now it's time for me to wrap things up and give you my final thoughts on Unnatural Growth. Again, this is an incredibly powerful card, and I am really glad they put a very restrictive casting cost on it. Again, this is just the type of card that you could just say, oh, okay, it's powerful, I'm just going to slap it in whatever deck because it doesn't matter, you know, I can cast it if it's 4 and a green. But luckily, it's not, and this very powerful card is going to be restricted to just certain decks, which is great. Again, back on the soapbox really quick, like Smothering Tithe should have been. That card should have been white, 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 white. So it's hard to cast, and everyone can't just use it. Again, I hope this trend continues of incredibly restrictive casting costs for incredibly powerful cards. If you're going to make something that powerful, at least make it hard to cast so every deck can't use it. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.